Hi guys, we are in a little bit of a different surrounding tonight. It was almost too dark to record in the garage, so I actually get to have a kitchen classroom today instead of a garage classroom. Today we're going to be looking at factoring quadratics, and if you remember from when we classified our polynomials, a quadratic is a polynomial where the highest exponent is 2. So a polynomial with a degree of 2 is called a quadratic, and we're going to be working with quadratics for the next few days. This is the basic form of a quadratic where you have ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just holding the place for a number value. This number right here is what we're going to be looking for to find the sum. And this number on the end, where C is what we're going to be looking for with the product. So this ties into the lesson that I did the day before, where you had to find two numbers that gives you a product of one thing and a sum of the other thing. And when you find those two numbers, you're able to factor these quadratics into the two binomials that multiply to give the quadratic. So in number 1, here's what you need to be looking at. I want to know what two numbers give me a product of 35 and a sum of 12. So it's kind of tying into what we did in the last lesson, and this one's kind of easy because it's all positives. So if you think about the two numbers that would satisfy both of these, those two numbers would be 7 and 5. I don't want that to look like an ordered pair, okay? So when you do 7 times 5, that gives you 35, and when you do 7 plus 5, that gives you 12. Now, what that does, that allows us to break this apart into the two binomials that give me that quadratic when I multiply it. I know that I'm going to have a plus 7 on the end, and I know I'm going to have a plus 5 on the end. Now, it does not matter to me if you had the 5 first and the 7 second. It's going to be the same. And then the first part of this is going to be the x. So this is the factored form for number 1. So if you broke that apart and found the two binomials that would give you this quadratic, it's going to be x plus 7 and x plus 5. So all you really need to do is to figure out your two numbers, and then you're going to write them in two separate binomials. Now, a quick way to check that is to go back and multiply these two things back together. So like what we did a couple of weeks ago when we multiplied our polynomials, remember you multiply both of those by the x and both of those by the 7, and it should take you back to this original one. So I'm going to show you how to check it just for this first one. You don't have to do the check. I recommend that you do just to make sure, but you don't have to. So x times x is x squared. X times 5 is 5x. 7 times x is 7x. And 7 times 5 is 35. So what I just did was the FOIL method, or the distributive property, to make sure that equals. And then if you combine this together, it does take you to 12x. So that would be the correct factored form for number 1. For number 2, we have a product. Remember, this last number is the number you look for the product. So I want two numbers that give me a product of 28 and a sum of 16. So you need to think about two numbers you can multiply together to get 28 and add together to get 16. And those two numbers would be 2 and 14. So if you do 2 times 14, it gives you 28. And if you do 2 plus 14, it gives you 16. And guys, this is where you might have to do some kind of guess and check. Just play around with the numbers until you find the two that work. So I'm going to factor this out into my two binomials. So it's going to be x plus 2 and x plus 14. Again, it doesn't matter if you have the 14 first and the 2 second, as long as that's what you have. You can multiply this back out with the FOIL method. Make sure it takes you back to the original polynomial. So this is the factored form of that. Now, when we move over to number 3, it gets a little bit trickier when you have the negatives, which some of you found out when we were doing the other assignment. So we need to think about what's going to give us a product of 12. And remember, there's like a 1 here that you don't see. So we also need a sum of negative 1. So we got to have a product of negative 12 and a sum of negative 1. Since this number is negative, it means that one of my numbers has to be negative and one of my numbers has to be positive. So the two numbers that I'm thinking of are going to be 4 and 3. Okay? How you decide which one's positive, which one's negative. Since this number is negative, the bigger of these two numbers has to be your negative. So it's going to be a negative 4 and a positive 3. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 4 plus 3, that gives me a sum of negative 1. So your two binomials for this would be x minus 4 and x plus 3. Okay? It does matter that you have the subtract with the 4 and the add with the 3. So just be careful and make sure that you have that. Again, if I'm going over this and you're like, I have no idea what she's talking about here, please come into the Zoom session and then I can go through and answer some specific questions with you. Okay, I have a few more examples of these to go over. So in number 4, I want to come up with two numbers that give me a product of 50 and a sum of negative 15. So a couple things to think about in this problem. My product is positive, my sum is negative. That tells me that my two numbers have to both be negative. That's the only way that I can have a positive product and a negative sum. So I'm going to think about two numbers that are going to give me 50 when I multiply and negative 15 when I add it. Those two numbers would be negative 5 and negative 10. Negative 5 times negative 10 is positive 50. Negative 5 plus negative 10 is negative 15. So your two binomials would be x minus 5 and x minus 10. And that would be the factored form for this quadratic. Again, you could multiply these out, double check yourself, and make sure they go back and give you your original polynomial. So for this one, I have a negative number here and a negative number here. Product and sum. So I'm thinking of two numbers I can multiply together to give me a negative 60, but add together to give me a negative 7. The two numbers you need to be thinking about are 5 and 12. Because I know I can combine together 5 and 12 and get 60, and I can combine together in some way 5 and 12 to get a 7 or negative 7. So here's where you decide which one's positive and which one's negative. Since this number is negative, the larger of these two numbers has to be the negative number. So your two factors are going to be x plus 5 and x minus 12. And when you work that out, I'm just going to show you how this works out when you check it. If you were to check this, x times x is x squared, x times negative 12 is negative 12x, 5 times x is 5x, and 5 times negative 12 is negative 60. This would combine together to give you a negative 7. Okay, two more. Number 6, we have a negative number here and a positive number here. So I'm still going to have one positive and one negative. You need to think of two numbers when you multiply them together that are going to give you a 40 and a 18. I lost my train of thought. Time out. Okay, so my two numbers, are going to be 2 and 20, okay? So those are your two numbers that you're going to put together that are going to give you a negative 40 in some way and an 18. Now, since this is positive, your smaller of these two numbers is going to be your negative value. So I'm going to assign the negative to the 2 in this situation. So that is going to be x minus 2 and x plus 20. And that way, when you do that middle part, you would have positive 20x and a minus 2x, and that's how you get the positive 18. So if this number is positive, then your smaller of the two numbers would be negative. Okay, last one. This is positive, this is negative. Since my product is positive and my sum is negative, then both of my numbers have to be negative. So I'm thinking of the numbers 7 and 3, and they are both going to have to be negative. Negative 7 times negative 3 gives me positive 21. Negative 7 plus negative 3 gives me negative 10. So those are the two numbers that I need. So your binomial is going to be x minus 7 and x minus 3. Double check it. When you multiply all that back together, it should take you back to your original polynomial. Okay, so tomorrow, the assignment that goes with this in Canvas is a pizzazz sheet. You do not have to do the whole pizzazz sheet. I think it's 1 through 14, but there's a third column on the pizzazz sheet. You do not have to do any of the third column. It's just the first two columns. The instructions specifically for that are in Canvas, so you can look at that and see what you have to do. Just like the other pizzazz sheet, you just need to put the letter of the answer in Canvas, and that's how I'll score it for you. If you have questions on this, please email me or come into the Zoom session tomorrow and we'll get that cleared up. I hope you guys have had a great day. I miss you, and just come into Zoom so I can at least say hey to you. All right, see you later. Bye.